A courtroom falls silent. The judge just fined a black man, only to realize he's a federal prosecutor. What happened next left everyone stunned. It started like any ordinary day in court, until a simple traffic case turned into a shocking twist no one saw coming. The small-town courthouse of Millstone County was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that creeps into places where everyone knows how things usually go. Locals shuffled in with slouched shoulders and tired eyes, their day already weighed down by the inconvenience of appearing in court. It was traffic court, hardly exciting, rarely dramatic. But today, something unexpected was about to unfold. Judge Raymond Thompson took his seat at the front of the courtroom. Late 50s, silver hair, a stern gaze that had intimidated defendants for nearly 2 decades. He had a reputation, strict, no nonsense, but fair if you followed the rules. However, that reputation came with whispers. Some said he treated people differently depending on how they looked, how they dressed, or even the color of their skin. Of course, no one could prove it. It was just a feeling, one people talked about in barbershops and at kitchen tables. Today, that feeling was about to be tested. The cases moved fast. One by one, defendants stood, pled their cases, some with lawyers, most without. Fines were handed out like parking tickets on a Monday morning. No one argued much. They just nodded, accepted it, and walked out. Judge Thompson's gavel was the soundtrack of the morning. Then, just after 10:15 a.m., a man stepped forward who didn't quite fit the usual pattern. He wore a dark navy suit, tailored, crisp. His shoes were polished, his posture straight. His presence carried weight, though he didn't speak at first. His name was Eric Daniels. His ticket? A simple stop sign violation, nothing unusual. On paper, he was just another name in the stack, but when he stepped up to the bench, something subtle shifted in the room. The courtroom, which had been running like a tired machine, paused. Not dramatically, just enough for a few heads to turn, a few eyebrows to raise. Judge Thompson glanced at the file. "Mr. Daniels, you've been cited for failing to stop at a sign on Highway 47. Do you contest this violation?" Eric spoke calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to request the opportunity to present my case." The judge blinked once. It wasn't the answer he expected. Most people just paid the fine and left. "This isn't a trial court, Mr. Daniels. I've reviewed the officer's statement. You ran the sign. The fine is $300, payable immediately or within 30 days. The gavel lifted. Eric raised a hand slightly, not to argue, but to hold the moment. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "with all due respect, I wasn't given the opportunity to speak, nor was I shown the evidence against me. There was no video, no dash cam, and no formal testimony." Judge Thompson didn't like to be interrupted. His eyes narrowed and his tone dropped. "You're here for a traffic violation, not a murder trial." The crowd chuckled quietly. Thompson always liked a jab, especially at someone who looked a little too confident. But Eric didn't flinch. He didn't stammer or raise his voice. He simply looked the judge in the eye and said, "I understand that, Your Honor. But whether it's a traffic violation or a felony, the court still has procedures, and respectfully, you've skipped a few." The room tensed. Now all eyes were on them. Judge Thompson stared for a second too long. You could see the question forming in his mind. Who does this guy think he is? He cleared his throat, a small attempt to regain control. "Mr. Daniels, you're free to pay the fine or request a formal trial. Otherwise, we're moving on." Eric reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. He placed it neatly on the table. "In that case," he said, "I formally request a trial and submit this record of my traffic history, along with documentation from the Department of Justice regarding my credentials. I believe the court should be aware of who I am before proceeding further." The room went still. Judge Thompson picked up the paper, scanning it. His eyes flicked back up. "What's this?" Eric adjusted his tie. "I'm a federal prosecutor, Your Honor. I work for the United States Department of Justice." Boom. It was like a thunderclap. The shift in the room was instant. The judge's face froze. The clerk beside him stopped typing. A murmur swept through the room like wind through dry leaves. This wasn't just another ticket. This wasn't just another black man in court. This was someone who knew the law inside and out. Someone who knew exactly what should have happened and what didn't. And that's when everything started to unravel. The courtroom wasn't ready. The judge wasn't ready, but Eric Daniels had just flipped the script, and now everyone was watching. For a few long seconds, Judge Raymond Thompson didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the letter in front of him, the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice glaring back like a spotlight in the dark. His mind seemed to be racing, calculating what this meant and what it would look like if he didn't play this right. You could hear the shift in the air. The spectators, once slumped and distracted, were sitting straighter now. The silence in the courtroom wasn't the usual type. It was the kind of silence you get when something big is happening, something people know they'll be talking about later. Thompson cleared his throat and tried to regain control. "Well, Mr. Daniels," he began, carefully choosing his words now. "I was unaware of your position. However, I assure you, it doesn't change how we administer justice in this courtroom. But Eric wasn't here for special treatment. And that's exactly what he made clear. I'm not asking for special treatment, Your Honor," he said calmly. "I'm asking for the same treatment every citizen in this room deserves. Procedural fairness." The word fairness hit hard. Thompson shifted in his chair. The balance of power had shifted too, and everyone felt it. Daniels wasn't just a man defending himself. He was holding up a mirror to the entire courtroom, and the reflection wasn't flattering. Eric continued. "When I walked in here today, I expected the law to speak for itself. But before I was allowed to say a word, I was judged, fined, and dismissed." He paused, then added, "That isn't just improper, it's unconstitutional." That word, unconstitutional, landed like a hammer. Daniels was no longer speaking as a defendant. He was speaking like a prosecutor, like a man who'd stood in countless courtrooms, argued real cases, and knew exactly what he was doing. The judge glanced around, suddenly aware that all eyes were still on him. His authority, the thing he carried so easily just moments ago, was now being tested, challenged, and by someone who wouldn't be intimidated. Trying to maintain composure, Judge Thompson leaned back and said, "This court operates within the guidelines of state law. Any oversight was unintentional." But even he didn't sound convinced. Eric Daniels didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was louder than a yell. "With all due respect, Your Honor, when citizens feel they have no voice in your courtroom, that's not just an oversight. That's a pattern, and it needs to be addressed." That was it. That line struck deep, not just with the judge, but with the people watching. The man in the back row who'd paid a ticket without question. The single mother who'd been rushed through a hearing with no chance to speak. They were hearing what they'd always felt, but never had the words or power to say out loud. Daniels had given them a voice, and that's when something extraordinary happened. An older woman in the courtroom, clearly not involved in the day's cases, nodded and said, not loudly but clearly, "He's right." It was like a spark. Suddenly, others began to murmur in agreement. A soft wave of validation echoed through the room. Judge Thompson looked shaken now. His usual confidence was unraveling, piece by piece. He leaned forward, folding his hands tightly together. "Mr. Daniels, I'd like to recess this matter and review your concerns further." Daniels responded, "I welcome that, Your Honor. Not just for my case, but for the sake of every person who walks through those doors expecting justice." And then, just like that, the power in the room had shifted completely. What began as a simple stop sign ticket had become a stand for integrity, for equal treatment, for what the legal system is supposed to be about. Not rules for some, and different ones for others, but fairness, regardless of your skin, your job, your income, or your status. Daniels didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't have to shout to be heard. All he needed was the truth, and a courtroom full of people finally willing to listen. The judge called for a short recess. But in reality, the court had already been adjourned in spirit. And what came next? That would change everything. The robe didn't protect him. The title didn't shield him. And now Judge Thompson had to face something bigger than a traffic violation, his own reflection in the eyes of justice. The courtroom was in recess, but the tension hadn't lifted. Judge Raymond Thompson had stepped into his chambers, door shut, blinds half drawn, trying to collect himself. But it wasn't just about regaining his composure. It was about facing a reality he hadn't been forced to confront in years. Maybe ever. For 2 decades, Judge Thompson had held this courtroom like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every case, every person, every verdict, he called the tune, and everyone danced to it. Until now. Until Eric Daniels walked in and turned. A routine stop sign violation into a full-blown reckoning. Inside his chambers, he sat at his desk, reading Eric's DOJ identification again. U.S. Department of Justice, Assistant United States Attorney, prosecutor in multiple federal trials, decorated, respected. There it was in black and white. Thompson didn't want to admit it, but he had misjudged the man. Completely. And not just misjudged him professionally. He had looked at Daniels and seen what he expected to see. A black man in a courtroom. Calm, composed. But in Thompson's mind, just another name in the stack. Just another fine. Just another person to move along. He hadn't seen power. He hadn't seen knowledge. He hadn't seen authority. Why? That question now echoed in his mind like a siren. Out in the courtroom, the spectators hadn't moved much. A few quietly whispered among themselves, still processing what they'd witnessed. Some were replaying moments from their own hearings, wondering if they too had been rushed, silenced, or dismissed. Others simply stared at the bench, waiting for what came next. Eric Daniels, meanwhile, sat quietly near the front, reviewing documents on a tablet. He wasn't angry, he wasn't smug, he looked focused, like a man who had seen this story play out before. And maybe he had. This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, not the first time someone looked at his skin before they looked at his resume. But this time, he was in a unique position to challenge it, not just for himself, but for everyone else who couldn't. The courtroom door opened. Judge Thompson stepped back in. His walk was slower, more deliberate. There was no gavel bang, no "court is back in session" announcement. Just a man who looked different. He sat down and cleared his throat. "Mr. Daniels," he said, "I've had a chance to review your credentials and your concerns." Eric nodded slightly but said nothing. He let the silence do its work. The judge continued. "I owe you an apology. Not because of your position, but because every person in this courtroom deserves the chance to be heard. I failed in that duty." Now, that caught everyone's attention. People weren't used to hearing apologies from the bench. Judges ruled. Judges dismissed. Judges didn't usually say sorry, but Thompson wasn't finished. "In reviewing your file," he added, "I also realized something troubling. I rushed this case. I denied you the opportunity to speak. I issued a fine without giving you your full right to present evidence or question the citation." He looked out across the room. "If I've done that to you, I have to ask myself, how many others have I done it to?" The room was frozen in awe. Eric finally spoke. "Your Honor, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but the issue isn't just about me. It's about a system where the process is often bypassed for the sake of convenience. That undermines justice, not just for one person, but for everyone watching." A pause. The judge nodded. "You're absolutely right." Then the unexpected happened. Judge Thompson vacated the fine. Officially. Not as a favor to a prosecutor, but because, by his own admission, it was issued without proper procedure. He turned to the clerk. "Make it official. Mr. Daniels is dismissed from this citation." A soft gasp spread through the audience, but it wasn't about the $300. It was about something bigger. For the first time, people in that courtroom saw accountability stretch in both directions, from the accused to the judge. Thompson looked at the gallery. "If anyone here today feels their hearing was rushed or unfair, I invite you to speak with the court clerk. We will review each case." It was a rare act of humility, and perhaps the beginning of change. Eric Daniels stood, nodded respectfully, and began gathering his things. But before he left, he turned back and said something that stayed with the judge long after the courtroom emptied. "Justice doesn't bend for titles. It rises when we're all held to the same standard." With that, he walked out, not just as a man who'd defended himself, but as one who had quietly reshaped a courtroom. The next morning, Millstone County was buzzing. Word of the courtroom. Incidents spread like wildfire. Coffee shops, barbershops, and front porches lit up with conversation. "Did you hear what happened in traffic court yesterday?" was the line on everyone's lips. People didn't just talk about Eric Daniels being a federal prosecutor. They talked about how calm he stayed, how he didn't raise his voice, how he demanded fairness not just for himself, but for the entire community. But what shocked folks more than anything? Judge Thompson's reaction. For the first time in years, people said the judge listened. He admitted he was wrong. That was new. That was different. Back in the courthouse, things started to shift. A few days later, Judge Thompson issued an order requiring every defendant to be given a full explanation of their charges and the chance to respond before any fines could be issued. He even began holding weekly review sessions of past cases. Wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. And in the middle of it all was the quiet force that had started the change. Eric Daniels. He didn't give press interviews. He didn't ask for applause. He just did what he always did. His job. But now, in Millstone County, justice had a new standard, and its roots traced back to one man who chose to speak when it mattered most. Sometimes, change doesn't come with a protest. It doesn't come with shouting or crowds. Sometimes, it comes in a quiet courtroom, with one man standing his ground. Eric Daniels didn't just defend himself that day. He revealed what happens when fairness is overlooked, when the system becomes more about routine than justice, and in doing so, he reminded an entire town what the law is really supposed to be about: listening, accountability, and equal treatment. Judge Thompson never went back to being the same man. Something changed in him. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the mirror Eric held up. But whatever it was, it stuck. He became more cautious, more attentive, and, most importantly, more human. As for the people of Millstone County, they began to walk into that courtroom a little differently, with straighter backs, with clearer voices, because they had seen that the system could be challenged and even changed. And Eric Daniels? He went back to his job as a federal prosecutor. No headlines, no interviews, just a quiet hero in a Navy suit, doing what he always did, standing for the law, even when the law forgets how to stand for itself. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It speaks in calm, firm words. And those words, they echo longer than any gavel ever could. If this story made you think, if it moved you even just a little, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you want more real, powerful stories that uncover truth, justice, and moments that challenge the system, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications.